Out of Africa by Rosemary Matheson. Miranda, 2228. Narrated by Chloe Schwank. What made me? Such a good question and so difficult to answer. In 64 years with so many experiences and twists and turns that are life, how do you whittle down to the defining ingredients that made me? I read the email posing this question whilst hunkered down in a hotel in Antigua, Guatemala, decidedly under the weather and having foregone a trek up Pacaya volcano. A couple of days later, I pondered the question as I hiked, no, that is too ambitious a term, plodded, in over 40-degree heat, through the jungle to the ancient Mayan ruins of Tikal. Now I am marvelling at a tiny turquoise-throated hummingbird flitting around exotic flowers, writing as I wait for my daughter to arrive from London to join us on a wildlife tour of Costa Rica. Doesn't everyone do that? Though considering all the people I know, perhaps not. Perhaps I'm different. In the past 10 years alone, I have kayaked in Venice, in Iceland, with a curious seal in Tasmania, walruses in Svalbard, and leopard sharks in California. I hiked in the Faroe Islands, trudged through the rain on the Isle of Arran, climbed Mount Vesuvius, and staggered up the steps at Cinque Terre. I rode a hot air balloon over the Serengeti, a seaplane to lunch with bears in Alaska, and a camel in Wadi Rum, Jordan. I swam with manatees in the USA, whale sharks in Western Australia, and cichlids in Lake Malawi. Way back in 1983, I informed my new husband we were going to Europe the next year. We travelled for 9 months. Setting out on this epic adventure, we met an English couple on a public bus travelling from Athens to Cape Sunion. They were impressed to find a pair of Australians so far from home and remarked that Aussies were an intrepid lot. This set the tone for the next 40 years of incredible journeys as intrepid Aussies. So, what made this intrepid Aussie? I was born in Fort Jameson, a small town in the Federation of Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland. Where, you might well ask? Today it is known as Chipata in Zambia. Nyasaland is now Malawi. Still, pretty remote. My father was a homicide detective with the Northern Rhodesia Police. He solved the murder of several gamekeepers in South Luangwa National Park and attended the scenes of an elephant trampling and lion mauling. Going to work with him one day, I remember powering down the Zambezi in a motorboat to visit a village of Rondeville huts. One hut kept a python in the rafters. Definitely not my idea of a house pet. My first long trip to Europe was at age 2, UK, France, and Germany. When I was 4, we moved to London for 6 months prior to emigrating to Australia in 1965. My father joined the RAAF, and we continued travelling, including 2 adventurous years living on the island of Penang, Malaysia. You would think this sufficient to inspire an adulthood filled with travel and adventure, but I think the threads of me go much deeper. I am the product of pioneers, serious pioneers, not just travellers. My relatively recent ancestry is filled with characters who left all they knew behind them to forge a new life in new lands. My father's side pioneered the Cape Town area of South Africa. A great-grandmother of his was the daughter of a Cape Town woman and an American ship captain, who came into port every few years, well before the much-vaunted 1820 settlers, among whom Dad also had forebears. He had a grandmother whose families were part of a grand scheme by Earl Grey, yes, the tea man, to introduce peasant folk from Prussia to farm South Africa. They were promised land and seeds and left their homes with little more than the clothes on their backs. The promises fell through, and yet they prospered. Now that's intrepid. My mother's side was equally interesting. 3 brothers on her maternal side arrived in Durban when it was nothing more than wattle and daub huts surrounded by, understandably, hostile natives and ferocious wild animals. They established the first post office in Durban. One stayed, the others moved on to colonies in Australia and New Zealand. The sons of the postmaster became pioneering farmers in Rhodesia. If you ever saw the movie Out of Africa, you will understand that this was a dangerous and challenging undertaking, not for the faint-hearted and a far cry from the rolling hills of Devon. My great-grandfather Josiah stands out amongst these amazing people. The youngest of 9 children from Carlisle, England, he and another brother left for the colonies to seek their fortunes. Josiah fought in the Boer War at the Siege of Mafeking, where he was a prize-winning marksman. He escorted a herd of cattle north through Bechuanaland, Botswana, to Rhodesia. He and his brother made the society pages in New York. His brother stayed and became a well-respected veterinarian, but Josiah couldn't settle. He took his young family to Melbourne, not just a day on a plane like today, and abandoned them there, returning to Rhodesia with his youngest son only. The son became my grandfather and went on to engineer the grand bridge spanning the Zambezi River between Zimbabwe and Zambia. Josiah was last encountered in his late 80s, living in the goldfields of Tanganyika. Even further back in my family history is Sir Martin Frobisher, 16th century privateer, explorer of Canada, and admiral under Sir Francis Drake against the Spanish Armada. Upon reflection, I realize this is an impressive ancestry filled with remarkable people who were not content to stay at home, but instead explored, pioneered, adventured, suffered, and prospered. I think I can be justifiably proud that they are part of me, that they made me. The end.